Have you ever walked away from a situation and felt that sharp inner sting, that moment where you think, I knew better? So why did I act that way? Not because you weren't intelligent, but because in that moment, your mind wasn't clear. It was crowded, pulled in different directions by emotion, ego, fear, by the urge to feel safe, validated, or respected. And here's what's unsettling. Life rarely punishes us for lacking intelligence. It punishes us for lacking clarity. Clarity isn't a personality trait you're born with. It's a discipline. It's a trained ability to see what's happening without immediately attaching a story that intensifies it. It's the skill of separating facts from interpretations and temporary emotions. From permanent decisions, the Stoics understood this deeply. They built an entire philosophy around clarity because they lived in a world where one uncontrolled reaction could cost you your reputation, your freedom, sometimes even your life. Epictetus, born into slavery, later taught that the very first battlefield is always the mind. Marcus Aurelius, writing as a Roman emperor during war, illness, and political pressure, reminded himself again and again. The mind can become either a fortress or a prison, depending on what you allow inside it. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't lose their lives through one dramatic mistake. They lose them through small, blurry decisions. A message sent too quickly, relationship tolerated for too long. A yes spoken out of guilt, a no said out of pride. A dream delayed because the timing didn't feel perfect. Clarity is what protects you from that slow erosion. So before we go further, I want to give you a simple anchor. One idea you can return to whenever your mind begins to rush. Epictetus said it plainly. It's not events themselves that disturb us, but the judgments we form about them. In other words, the event is one thing, the meaning you attach to it is another. The event may be neutral, minor, even ordinary, but the meaning can grow into a storm that pulls your decisions off course. Picture something simple. Someone you care about replies with a short, cold sentence. The fact is just a sentence. The mind immediately adds a narrative. They don't respect me. They're pulling away. I'm not enough. And suddenly, you're no longer choosing. You're reacting, trying to escape discomfort, trying to regain control, trying to fix a disaster that exists only in your imagination. This is how relationships are damaged. Opportunities are sabotaged. And people betray their own values, not out of malice, but out of mental fog. The Stoic goal is not emotional numbness. It's sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "You have power over your mind, not external events. Understand this, and you will find strength." Notice what he's doing here. He isn't denying reality. He's assigning responsibility correctly. The world will always move. People will always be unpredictable. Noise will always exist. But your mind can be trained to become quiet enough to see clearly and strong enough to choose deliberately. That's the real work we're doing here, building a way of thinking that doesn't collapse under pressure, a way of deciding that you can respect later, a way of seeing reality without panic, fantasy, or the need to win every moment. Right now, as you listen, bring to mind one decision you've been avoiding, one choice you keep pushing into the future. Don't analyze it. Just let one thing rise naturally. Now ask yourself one honest question. Am I confused or am I afraid? Because much of what we label as confusion is actually fear wearing a smarter mask. Fear of being wrong, fear of losing comfort, fear of disappointing someone, fear of stepping into a new identity where excuses no longer protect you. In a moment, we'll begin walking through the traps that steal clarity, reaction, emotion, overload, donate, indecision, framing, and even beliefs you inherited but never chose. But everything rests on this foundation. Clarity isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you practice. Each time you pause, question the story, and act with intention, you rebuild trust with yourself. So let's begin where real decision-making actually starts. Precise moment something happens and your mind wants to react before you've even had time to think. reaction versus intentional thought. Have you noticed how the most costly decisions in life are often made in seconds? Not because you chose speed, but because something inside you couldn't tolerate the feeling of waiting. That's reaction, and it's dangerous because it doesn't feel wrong in the moment. It feels like protection, like strength, like I won't let this happen. Like I need to fix this now. But most reactions aren't wisdom. They're the nervous system trying to regain control as fast as possible. The Stoics had a specific name for what hits you first, the initial mental image. Immediate impression. The first interpretation. The first emotional conclusion that appears before you even have a chance to vote. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself again and again that an initial impression can be erased instantly. That may sound extreme until you understand what he meant. You don't erase it by force. You erase its authority. You stop the first story from turning into an order not by suppressing it, but by seeing it clearly and refusing to obey it blindly. Because reaction isn't just behavior. Reaction is a worldview. It's the habit of allowing the first interpretation to become reality. Someone speaks sharply, and the mind says, "They're disrespecting me." Plans change, and the mind says, "This always happens to me." Tension rises, and the mind says, "I can't handle this." And the moment you believe that first voice, you stop responding. You start performing, you defend, you attack, you over-explain. You withdraw. You numb yourself. Later, when your body settles you, look back and realize something uncomfortable. You weren't responding to life itself. You were responding to your mind's first draft. Intentional thought is the moment you begin editing. Epictetus was uncompromising about this. When an impression arrives, he said, don't accept it immediately. Examine it. Train your mind like a gatekeeper. You are only an impression, you tell it, not the thing itself. That single distinction can save you from years of regret, because it creates distance. It turns this is true into this feels true. It turns I must act into I want to act. And inside that distance, you regain something. Rare choice. Here's what most people miss. The difference between reaction and intentional thought is not intelligence, it's time. A very small amount of time. Sometimes just a few breaths. And that's why clarity is difficult today. The modern world is designed to steal your pause, notifications, urgency, social pressure, expectation of instant response, the idea that silence equals weakness. We live in a culture that mistakes speed for competence. But inside your own life, speed often means captivity. If reaction is speed, intentional thought is space, and the simplest Stoic practice, almost embarrassingly simple, is this. Pause before you answer, not to be polite, to be free. When you pause, you're not just delaying. You're refusing to let your emotional body decide on its own. Because many poor decisions are really just attempts to escape discomfort. The discomfort of uncertainty. The discomfort of being misunderstood. The discomfort of not controlling how someone sees you. The discomfort of not knowing what comes next. Reaction says, end the discomfort now. Intentional thought says, let me understand first. You can see this everywhere. Someone criticizes you, and your mouth prepares the perfect sentence to protect your pride. Someone ignores you, and your hand reaches for your phone to prove you still matter. Someone offers an opportunity, and you say yes instantly, afraid it won't return. Someone asks for a favor, and you agree resentfully because you can't tolerate the tension of saying no. These aren't decision problems. They're discomfort problems. Seneca warned that anger is a form of temporary madness. Not because anger is always wrong, but because it narrows your vision. It places you in a tunnel where the only objective is to win the moment. Inside that tunnel, you can't see consequences. You can't see tomorrow. You can't see your values. You can only see the urge. Intentional thought widens the room again. So here's a simple method you can use the next time you feel yourself being pulled. First, name what's happening without drama, as if you're describing weather. I feel the urge to prove myself. I feel the urge to punish. I feel the urge to fix this immediately. Naming transforms possession into observation, and observation creates space. Then ask one question that cuts through the fog. If I do what I'm about to do, will I respect myself tomorrow? That question doesn't require perfect logic. It doesn't require certainty. It requires honesty. And honesty is the foundation of clarity. Reaction is usually about ego being right, being seen, being safe, being in control. Intentional thought is about alignment, becoming someone you can live with. And here's the uncomfortable part. Indecision is often just reaction in slow motion. You think you're thinking, but you're really waiting for your emotions to settle enough to choose, or waiting for someone else to decide so you can avoid responsibility, or waiting for perfect clarity, which rarely arrives, because life doesn't offer certainty as a gift. And that leads us to the next truth you must understand to make better decisions. Emotion usually arrives first. Reason comes later, not as a guide but as a lawyer arguing on behalf of what emotion already chose. That's where we go next. Emotion first. Reason second. Have you ever made a decision that felt perfectly logical in the moment, only to realize later, when the emotion faded, that the logic was just a costume? This is one of the hardest truths to accept, because we like to believe we reason first and feel afterward. But for most of us, life works in reverse. We feel first. Only afterward do we think, and even then, what we call thinking is often something else entirely. It's justification. It's the mind trying to make an emotional decision sound intelligent, reasonable, even noble. The Stoics understood this deeply. They never described the mind as a perfectly calm judge floating above the body. They described it as a place that can be invaded, a space where impressions arrive suddenly, sometimes carrying fear, sometimes anger, sometimes desire. So the real question is never whether you will feel. You will. The question is who gets to decide what happens next. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations for himself because, even as emperor, he knew how easily he could be influenced by praise, by insult, by exhaustion, by loneliness, by pressure, by his own pride, and what he practiced wasn't positive thinking. It was something far more powerful. He named the mechanism. He watched what the mind was doing and called it out. He reminded himself, this is an impression. This is not automatically truth. Slow down. That pause, that recognition, is the beginning of emotional clarity. Not suppressing emotion, not denying it, but refusing to let it disguise itself as fact. Because emotion is a signal, not a verdict. It carries information, sometimes important information, but it is never the full story. Fear can signal danger, or it can signal growth. Anger can point to injustice, or it can point to a wounded ego. Sadness can mean loss, or it can mean fatigue. Desire can mean alignment, or it can mean escape. The problem isn't that we feel these things. The problem is that we treat them like final answers. And when we do, we slip into a subtle illusion where the intensity of a feeling becomes proof of correctness. I feel strongly, therefore I must be right. I feel anxious, therefore something bad is coming. I feel offended, therefore I've been attacked. I feel excited, for this must be the path. That's how people get pulled into chaos. By confusing emotional volume with truth, Epictetus offered a simple but uncompromising correction. When something happens, separate the event from the judgment. Not because judgment is always wrong, but because judgment is where distortion begins. The event is clean. The judgment is colored. The event is reality. The judgment is interpretation. Consider something familiar. You send a message. Hours pass without a reply. The event is silence, nothing more. But emotion rushes in, and the mind starts constructing a story. They don't care. I'm being ignored. I'm always the one trying. Then reason enters, but not to seek truth. To build a case, you scan past memories, collect evidence, rehearse arguments. It feels rational, but it's not. It's emotion wearing a suit. And this is why clarity is rare. because the mind is extraordinarily skilled at defending whatever the heart is afraid to feel. Seneca warned that we often add suffering to suffering, that we are more frightened than harmed, that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Notice how modern that sounds. The body feels discomfort. The mind predicts a future. The prediction becomes torture. And we call that thinking. But clear thinking is not endless thinking. Clear thinking is accurate thinking. So what do you do with this reality that emotion arrives first? The first feeling as a command. Here's a shift that changes everything. When a strong emotion appears, don't ask, "What should I do?" Ask instead, "What am I trying to protect?" Because emotion is usually guarding something. Fear guards safety. Anger guards dignity. Jealousy guards self-worth. Shame guards belonging. When you see what's being protected, wisdom becomes possible. Sometimes what's being guarded matters. Sometimes it's an illusion that's been quietly running your life. And there's another question that goes even deeper. If I act from this feeling right now, what inner experience am I trying to avoid? Because many impulsive choices are not about the situation at all, or about avoiding something inside. You don't scroll endlessly because you love the internet. You scroll because you don't want to sit with your own mind. You don't chase validation because you love attention. You chase it because you don't want to feel invisible. You don't stay busy because you love productivity. You stay busy because silence forces you to face yourself. Stoicism doesn't condemn you for this. It simply asks you to stop deceiving yourself. And this is where real discipline begins. You practice staying present long enough for reason to arrive as a guide, not as a defense attorney. You allow the emotion to exist, but you don't let it dictate. You let it speak. But you don't let it drive. Marcus Aurelius grounded himself through something that feels almost like mental hygiene. He reduced things to what they actually were, not to become cold, but to become free. An insult becomes sound and opinion. Temptation becomes a bodily sensation. A setback becomes a change in external conditions. The emotion remains, but it loses its hypnotic power. And it's that hypnotic power that makes decisions sloppy and regretful. So here's a simple internal rule you can use next time emotion spikes. I will not decide while I am chemically altered, because that's what a strong emotion is. A shift in your body's chemistry. Chemistry can be beautiful, but it isn't always wise. Give the wave time to pass. Not days, sometimes minutes. Sometimes a walk. Sometimes a few deep breaths. And when the chemistry settles, clarity quietly returns. Sometimes all it takes is a single breath, a moment where you can honestly say, "I'm feeling this," instead of becoming it. And when you do that, something important unlocks. Once you accept that emotion arrives first, you stop pretending you're perfectly rational. And the moment you stop pretending, you become more powerful. Because self-awareness is power. The person who can say, "My mind is trying to justify a fear," has already stepped outside the trap. And this leads us directly to the next enemy of clarity. We often don't act not because we don't know what to do, but because we're waiting to feel certain. We're waiting for the emotion to fully settle, waiting for the fear to disappear, waiting for the mind to hand us a guarantee. And we call that being responsible. But very often it's just fear hiding behind a respectable word. So let's talk about that trap. It's the trap of waiting for certainty and how quietly it delays your life. Have you ever told yourself, "I'll decide when, I'm sure"? And then weeks pass, months pass, sometimes years. And without realizing it, the decision gets made anyway, because not choosing is still a choice. This is one of the most common ways intelligent people lose clarity. Not through stupidity, but through sophistication. Endless analysis. Careful language. Just need to think it through a little more. And sometimes, yes, thinking is wisdom. But there's a line. Cross it, and thinking becomes a hiding place. Stoics would call this a form of attachment. Attachment to certainty. Attachment to control. Attachment to the fantasy that life will eventually present a perfect, risk-free moment. But life doesn't work that way. Even Marcus Aurelius, with the power of an emperor, didn't receive certainty. he received responsibility, waiting for. Certainty feels safe because it feels moral. It feels mature, feels careful. But many times it isn't careful at all. It's fear of consequences, fear of discomfort, fear of losing options, fear of being the one who made the call. So you delay, you research more, you ask more people, you gather more information. You keep the decision open, because as long as you haven't chosen, you haven't risked being wrong. But that safety comes at a cost, because clarity isn't just knowing what's best. Clarity is acting in alignment with what you already know. Seneca warned that we waste life by postponing it, that people are always about to live, but never fully living, and that's exactly what waiting for certainty does. It turns your life into a waiting room. The worst part, you can sit in that waiting room while still being busy, still productive, still looking successful from the outside, all while something inside you knows you're avoiding a door you need to walk through. Certainty is not the price of entry. Courage is. So let's make this real. Think about where people most often wait for certainty. Leaving a toxic job, starting a business, ending a relationship, committing to one. Moving cities, changing habits, choosing a direction. In all these cases, people say, I don't know if it's the right choice. But if you listen closely, what they usually mean is, I don't know if it will feel comfortable. I don't know if I'll feel emotionally safe. I don't know if I can handle the regret if it goes wrong. That's honest. It's human. Stoicism doesn't shame you for that. It teaches you how to choose without certainty, because the world rarely gives guarantees, but life still asks you to decide. Epictetus always brought it back to control. You don't control outcomes. You don't control rewards. You don't control approval, but you do control your intention, your effort, your character, your willingness to adapt. That's the foundation. Place your confidence in what belongs to you. You stop needing guarantees. Here's a quiet principle that can change. How you make decisions, you don't need certainty to move. You need direction and the willingness to adjust. Most people treat decisions like permanent verdicts. Like once you choose, you're trapped. But most decisions are more like steering. You turn, you observe, you correct. You don't need perfect visibility to drive forward. You need enough light to move on, the humility to respond when conditions change. Waiting for certainty often hides perfectionism. Perfectionism is expensive. If you believe you must choose perfectly, you will. Choose late. If you believe you must avoid regret, you will avoid life. And the irony is this. Most regret doesn't come from acting imperfectly. It comes from waiting too long. You regret letting fear set your timeline. You regret the years you gave to maybe. Marcus Aurelius cut through this by reminding himself of one simple truth. Time is always leaving. Not as drama. As fact, every day you delay a necessary decision, you pay with time. And time doesn't come back. So how do you step out of this trap? You stop treating decisions as bets on outcomes and start treating them as commitments to a process instead. Of asking, will this work? Ask, am I willing to work? Instead of asking, will they change? Ask, am I willing to uphold my standards? Instead of asking, what if I fail? Ask, what if I keep failing the same way because I never try? Because the real cost isn't choosing wrong. It's repeated avoidance, the kind that slowly turns you into someone who no longer trusts themselves. Here's something practical. Take one decision you've been delaying and ask yourself, what's the smallest version of this decision I can test in the next 7 days? Not a lifetime commitment. A small step. A conversation. A boundary. A trial week. One action that breaks the spell of waiting, because clarity grows through movement. It's not through rumination. And that brings us to the next problem. Even when we're not waiting for certainty, we still struggle to think clearly because the mind is drowning in inputs. Too much information, too many opinions, too many open tabs in the brain. We call it staying informed, but often it's just mental clutter. So next, we'll talk about information overload and how simplifying what you allow into your mind restores clarity faster than you think. Have you ever felt that strange kind of exhaustion where your body isn't tired at all, but your mind feels swollen, overfed, overstimulated, unable to digest another thought? Every decision feels heavier than it should. Because you're weak. Not because you're lazy, because you're overloaded. And overload is one of the most underestimated enemies of clarity. It doesn't arrive wearing the mask of a problem. It arrives as being informed, as researching more, as keeping your options open. But inside your nervous system, it often feels like a quiet, constant pressure, a low-grade panic you can't quite name. Because when you consume too much input, you lose something essential. Your own signal. The modern world teaches a subtle lie. The more you know, the safer you'll be. The Stoics would challenge that immediately. Not because knowledge is bad, because the human mind is not designed to carry endless noise and still make clean decisions. Marcus Aurelius wasn't writing his meditations in isolation. He lived inside a storm of information, reports, letters, political pressure, war, disease, betrayal, responsibility for an empire. And yet, what did he keep returning to? Not more input, fewer judgments, fewer stories, less mental clutter, more presence with what actually matters. There's a specific kind of confusion that comes from information that isn't yours. Opinions you didn't ask for, trends you don't need, advice from people who won't live with the consequences. Add constant comparison to that. Other people's lives looking clearer, easier, more successful, and slowly your decisions stop coming from values, they start coming from pressure. You begin optimizing for what sounds impressive. You fear missing the perfect path. You delay, believing one more piece of information will finally remove the risk. But risk never disappears. It just changes shape. Epictetus would bring this back to one discipline: attention. In his world, it wasn't social media. It was gossip, reputation games, the pull of other people's judgments. His solution wasn't to defeat the noise, it was to refuse it, because freedom begins with where you place your attention. Attention is the doorway to the mind. If you let chaos enter all day, you can't be surprised when your decisions feel chaotic. And there's a deeper cost here. Information overload doesn't just confuse you, it erodes trust in your own perception. You start outsourcing your thinking, treating your intuition like it needs approval, believing that if you don't know everything, you don't deserve to choose. So you keep consuming. And paradoxically, the more you consume, the less certain you feel. Every new idea creates another branch, another what if, other fear that you're missing something. It's like trying to see the bottom of a lake while stones keep being thrown into it. Clarity is not the ability to consider every angle. Clarity is the ability to decide which angles matter. Seneca warned that a scattered life becomes a shallow one. It's not poetically mechanically. A scattered mind can't see deeply, it reacts faster, it becomes suggestible. And a suggestible mind is easily used by crowds, by appetites, by algorithms, by fear. The Stoic response to overload isn't just take a break. It's sharper than that. Treat your mind like a republic. You are responsible for governing. Not every voice gets a vote. Not every thought belongs in the Senate. Not every headline deserves a seat at your table. You choose what enters, because you are the one who pays the price when the mind becomes so overcrowded. So here's the practical turning point. If information doesn't help you act wisely today, it's probably noise. That doesn't mean ignorance. It means you stop using information as a substitute for courage. Look at the decision you're holding right now and ask, honestly, am I learning? Am I avoiding? Because there is a clean kind of learning that prepares action. And there is a foggy kind that delays it. Clean learning points toward a next step. Foggy learning keeps you floating. And here's another question that cuts even deeper. How many opinions am I carrying that I never asked for? Because sometimes your mind isn't overloaded with information, it's overloaded with other people, their expectations, their fears disguised as advice, their definitions of success, their timelines. And when you carry all that, your own priorities go quiet. So try this not as a trick, but as an act of sovereignty. For the next 24 hours before you scroll, watch, read or listen, ask one question. What am I trying to feel right now? If the answer is relief, escape, numbness, or certainty, then you're not consuming for wisdom. You're consuming to manage emotion. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. But once you see it, you gain the power to choose something better, and sometimes something better is surprisingly simple. Fewer inputs, fewer comparisons, fewer maybe options, more quiet contact with the decision itself, because most of the time, you already know what the right move is. You're just too mentally crowded to admit it. And that leads us to the next layer. Even if you reduce the noise, you still live inside a container all day, your environment. Your mind does not think in a vacuum. Your surroundings train your attention, your mood, your standards, your impulses, your self-respect. So if you want clarity, you have to ask a serious question. What kind of room am I placing my mind in every day? Yeah, that's where we go next. The impact of environment. And then, without noticing when it happened, you find yourself back inside the same old patterns. Not because you suddenly lost discipline. Not because you became weak, but because your environment quietly trained you to become the person you used to be. This is one of the most humbling truths about clarity. Your mind is not just you. Your mind is you, plus what surrounds you, the people. You spend time with the sounds that fill your space, a mess or order on your desk, the notifications that interrupt your thoughts, the habits baked into your schedule, the conversations you normalize, the places you keep returning to. All of these shape how you think far more than your intentions ever will. The Stoics understood this with unsettling accuracy. They didn't have modern language for psychology or neuroscience, but they were brutally honest about how influence works. Epictetus warned that if you live among people who complain, you will learn complaint. If you surround yourself with those who chase status, you will begin chasing it too, not because you're fake, not because you're weak, but because the human mind is porous. It absorbs. Marcus Aurelius, writing as emperor, lived inside an environment most people would collapse under: politics, war, pressure, flattery, betrayal. And if you read him carefully, you can feel what he's trying to do. He's building an inner environment that protects him from the outer one. He keeps telling himself to return to simplicity, to return to nature, to return to his principles, as if he's constructing a quiet room inside his mind where the empire cannot enter. That's the real lesson. If you don't design your environment will design you. And clarity is one of the first things it will take, because unclear environments create unclear minds. A cluttered room doesn't just look messy. It whispers unfinished business all day long. A phone full of distractions doesn't just entertain you. It fractures your attention until you can't hold a single thought long enough to trust it. A friend group built on gossip doesn't just talk. It trains your mind to see life as drama, to live in constant interpretation. A workplace addicted to urgency doesn't just keep you busy. It conditions your nervous system to treat everything like an emergency. And when everything feels urgent, clear thinking disappears. You don't reflect. You react. An environment isn't only physical. It's social, emotional, digital. It even includes the environment of your inner dialogue. What you repeatedly say to yourself becomes the mental air you breathe. So let's get practical if you want. To make better decisions, you need to accept one simple truth. Your environment either supports your higher self or feeds your lower impulses. There is no neutral. That may sound harsh, but it's actually freeing, because it means you don't have to fight yourself as much as you think. Sometimes you're not lacking discipline. You're living inside a system designed to drain it. You're trying to think clearly inside, space that constantly pulls you toward noise, comparison, impulse. Seneca warned that the mind is rarely corrupted by dramatic vices. It's eroded by small, daily indulgences that feel harmless. That's the environment effect. It doesn't destroy you in one moment. It wears you down through small permissions. So here's a question that brings instant clarity. What does my environment reward? Because every environment rewards something. Some reward calm, some reward speed, some reward depth, Some reward performance, some reward honesty, some reward pleasing, some reward growth, some reward comfort, some reward discipline, some reward escapism. Whatever your environment rewards, you will slowly become. And here's an even sharper version of that question. In this environment, what kind of person is easiest to be? Because the easiest version of you reveals what the environment is training. If the easiest version of you is distracted, reactive, and anxious, that's not just personality, that's conditioning. So what does Stoicism suggest? Not that you escape the world, not that you build a perfect bubble, but that you become deliberate. Clarity is fragile and noisy. Places so start small. Choose one space you actually control. Your desk, your bedroom, your calendar, your car. Just one. Turn it into a clarity zone. Remove one thing that pulls you toward distraction. Add one thing that pulls you toward intention. Turn off one notification category. Clean one surface. Move your phone charger out of reach at night. Put a book where your phone usually sits. Block 1 hour where you cannot be interrupted. It sounds minor, but environment works through small cues, and small cues shape massive behavior. Then do something deceptively powerful. Change the first 5 minutes of your day, because the first 5 minutes is an environment. If the first thing you do is absorb other people's noise messages, headlines, social feeds, you've surrendered your mind before you've even met yourself. But if the first 5 minutes belong to you, silence, water, a short walk, single written intention, then your day begins with sovereignty, and sovereignty is clarity. Now bring this back to decisions. Good decisions are rarely made inside chaos. They're made when the mind has space to see. So if you feel stuck, consider this. The answer might not be think harder. The answer might be change the room. Change the environment enough that your mind stops fighting itself. And that brings us to the next layer. Because once environment is handled, you face a deeper question most people never ask. Not, what do I want? But, what am I optimizing for? Because every decision optimizes for something. Comfort, status, peace, growth, love, security, freedom. And if you don't choose consciously, your impulses will choose for you. So ask yourself, what am I optimizing for? Have you ever looked at your own life and felt a quiet confusion? Not because you don't work hard, not because you lack ambition, but because your choices don't point in one direction. You're moving, but you're not arriving. That happens when you optimize for the wrong thing, or more often, when you optimize for 10 things at once without admitting it. Every decision is an optimization problem. When you reply instantly, you may be optimizing for approval. When you stay in a draining job, you may be optimizing for security. When you avoid a hard conversation, you may be optimizing for comfort. When you push yourself relentlessly, you may be optimizing for status. And this question changes everything. When you tolerate disrespect just to keep the peace, you may be optimizing for belonging. When you keep chasing a goal that no longer fits who you are, you may be optimizing for identity, the version of yourself you're afraid to let die. And here's the uncomfortable truth. You can become extremely skilled at optimizing and still build a life that feels hollow because you optimized for what was loud. It's not for what was true. The Stoics were very clear about what they optimized for. Not comfort, not applause, not approval, character, virtue, the kind of person you are when no one is watching and no one is clapping. Epictetus didn't say optimize for ease. He taught people to optimize for freedom. And in Stoicism, freedom isn't political first. It's inner freedom, the ability to choose your actions without being owned by fear, desire, or social pressure. Marcus Aurelius had everything people chase: power, status, authority. And yet, he kept writing to himself like a man who could still be dragged around by his own thoughts. That's why he's credible. He wasn't preaching from a peaceful life. He was fighting for clarity inside a life filled with danger and pressure. Again and again, he returned to the same questions. What truly matters? What is worthy of me? What is in my control? What is the proper aim? That's optimization language, just without modern terms. So ask it plainly. When you make choices in your daily life, what are you optimizing for? Because every choice has a cost. If you optimize for comfort, you pay with growth. If you optimize for growth, you pay with comfort. If you optimize for status, you pay with authenticity. If you optimize for belonging, you sometimes pay with truth. If you optimize for peace, you sometimes pay with confrontation. If you optimize for freedom, you pay by being misunderstood. If you optimize for love, you pay with vulnerability. There is no cost-free life. The only question is whether you are paying consciously or paying by accident. Most confusion comes from accidental payments. You say you want peace, but you optimize for winning arguments. You say you want closeness, but you optimize for control. You say you want respect, but you optimize for being liked. You say you want confidence, but you optimize for never failing. You say you want meaning, but you optimize for looking successful, and your mind cannot be clear. When your aims are divided, your decisions become small civil wars. One part of you wants long-term integrity. Another part wants immediate relief. One part wants depth. Another wants stimulation. One part wants courage. Another wants safety. And you call the tension confusion. But it's not confusion. It's misalignment. Seneca spoke about living according to nature. Not nature as in forests and rivers, but your deeper design. The part of you that knows. When you're acting from fear, the part that knows. When you're selling yourself cheaply, the part that knows. When you're choosing easy reward over real reward. To live according to nature is to stop betraying that inner compass. So here's a practical move. Take one decision you're struggling with. Now ask, if I choose option A, what am I optimizing for? And if I choose option B, what am I optimizing for? Don't answer with surface outcomes like money or time. Go deeper. Are you optimizing for safety, pride, freedom, comfort, approval, growth? Once you see that, the fog starts to lift. Because now you see what you're actually trading. And here's an even sharper question. What do I want my life to reward? Because your daily system rewards something. If your life rewards distraction, you become distracted. If it rewards discipline, you become disciplined. If it rewards avoidance, you become avoidant. If it rewards courage, you become courageous. And if you say you want one thing, but your system rewards another, you'll feel constant inner conflict. Clarity doesn't mean life becomes easy. It means your aim becomes simple. Marcus Aurelius tried to reduce his aim to one thing: to do the work of a human being with dignity, justice, courage, and self-control. That wasn't poetry. That was an optimization target. It meant that when something happened, he could ask, what would a just person do here? What would discipline look like here? What would courage demand here? And the decision cleaned itself. Now bring this into modern life. If you don't define your optimization target, you'll default to the world's. Your phone optimizes for attention. Social media optimizes for outrage and comparison. Many workplaces optimize for speed and visibility. Many social circles optimize for approval. If you don't choose your aim, you'll be recruited into someone else's. And that's how people spend years busy, but not alive. So choose one word for this season of your life. Not forever. Just now: freedom, peace, strength, integrity, craft, health, focus, courage. One word, because a filter creates clarity. Without a filter, everything feels important, and nothing feels meaningful. And once you name that aim, a painful truth appears. Many times you're not indecisive because you're confused. You're indecisive because you're afraid. Afraid of losing something, afraid of choosing wrong, afraid of being judged, afraid of becoming responsible for your own life. Indecision is fear, wearing respectable clothing. Have you ever been stuck on a decision for so long that it started to feel like part of who you are? Not just undecided, but an undecided person. That's usually not confusion. That's fear that. Learn to speak calmly. Indecision is one of the most socially accepted forms of self-betrayal because it looks thoughtful. It looks careful. It looks mature, but underneath, it's the same mechanism as panic, just slower. Choosing is heavy. Choosing collapses. It's possibility into reality. Choosing means you might be wrong. You might disappoint someone. You might lose comfort. You might face regret, and worst of all, choosing forces you to face what you truly want. Fear doesn't want truth. Fear wants safety. The Stoics never said, don't feel fear. They said, put fear in its proper place. Fear grows dangerous when it's allowed to rule, when it controls timelines, and it vetoes growth. When it pretends to be practicality while quietly protecting a fragile identity. Marcus Aurelius knew this. He wrote reminders to himself, not because he was fearless, but because he was human. And this is where clarity deepens. Because your mind is always being pulled outward. Pulled by what needs a reply. Pulled by what wants attention. Pulled by what is urgent but not important. And slowly, without noticing it, stop asking what you want. You start asking what's next. That's not clarity. That's drift. Clarity requires friction. It requires you to pause long enough to feel the difference between what excites your ego and what steadies your soul. The Stoics were ruthless about this. They didn't ask what is impressive. Asked what is necessary. They didn't ask what will keep me busy. They asked what will keep me upright. Marcus Aurelius wrote that if you don't know which port you're sailing toward, no wind is favorable. Availability feels like wind. Alignment feels like direction, and direction is what gives movement meaning. Now, there's one final layer we need to touch, because even when you understand fear, environment, overload, indecision, alignment, clarity can still collapse. In one subtle way, inherited beliefs, ideas you didn't choose but live by. Have you ever noticed how some decisions feel impossible, not because they're unclear, but because they violate an invisible rule you've been following your whole life? Rules. Like, good people don't disappoint others. Stability matters more than fulfillment. You should be grateful for what you have. Risk is irresponsible. Success looks like this. This is just how life is. You didn't consciously choose these beliefs. You absorbed them from family, from culture, from fear disguised as wisdom. And the problem isn't that they're always wrong. The problem is that you mistake them for truth. Epictetus warned that we are disturbed not by events, but by the opinions we carry about them. Some of those opinions aren't even yours. They're inherited. And when inherited beliefs run your decisions, clarity becomes impossible because you're not deciding as yourself. You're deciding as a memory, as an expectation, as a voice from the past that never learned how to grow with you. Stoicism doesn't ask you to rebel against everything. It asks you to examine, to ask, is this belief helping me live with courage and integrity? Or is it keeping me safe, small, and approved? Because beliefs that once protected you can later imprison you. And clarity requires you to outgrow some rules without hating the people who taught them to you. That's maturity. Seneca wrote that we suffer because we mistake habit for necessity. Just because something is familiar doesn't mean it's right. Just because you've always done something doesn't mean it deserves to continue. So here's a final practice. Simple, but not easy. The next time you feel confused, stuck, or mentally noisy, don't ask, what should I do? Ask 3 cleaner questions. What is actually happening? What am I adding to it? And what would I do if I weren't afraid of losing approval? Those questions cut through illusion. They return you to the present, because clarity is not a dramatic breakthrough. It's a repeated discipline, pausing before reacting, separating fact from story, choosing direction over comfort, acting without guarantees, protecting your inner space, and aligning your life with what you truly respect. The Stoics didn't promise peace as a feeling, they promised peace as a position. Position of someone who can live with their choices, someone who doesn't need the world to be quiet, because their mind is ordered. And that's the real goal. not to eliminate uncertainty, not to control outcomes, not to never feel fear, but to become the kind of person who can move forward anyway. Calm, clear, and clear. When you're constantly negotiating with yourself, you end up split inside. One part of you wants to move forward, while another keeps holding back. That inner division is exhausting. Stoicism doesn't ask you to become rigid or cold. It asks you to become principled. To do fewer things, but to do them with full intention. To say no more often, not from ego, but from respect for your own life. To stop treating every opportunity as proof of your worth. Because here's the deeper truth: opportunities never run out. The world will always place something in front of you. Another option, another distraction, another door slightly open. But alignment, what truly fits who you are, is rare. It doesn't happen by accident. It has to be protected. And it's built by refusing what is merely available so you can choose what is genuinely right. This is where clarity takes a sharp turn. Because once you learn to choose alignment, you also learn how to frame reality correctly. Most people don't suffer because of what happened. They suffer because of how they interpret what happened. The frame you place around an event decides what you notice, what you ignore, what you fear, what you believe is possible. This is the power of framing. The same situation can feel like a disaster, a lesson, or a challenge, depending on the sentence you attach to it in your mind. That sentence is the frame, and most people never realize they're using one. They believe they're seeing reality as it is. But in truth, they've drawn a mental border around the moment, assigned it meaning, and then reacted to that meaning as if it were absolute truth. The frame is invisible while you're inside it. That's why it controls you. At its core, Stoicism is the discipline of choosing your frame. Epictetus expressed this with brutal clarity. We are not disturbed by events themselves, but by the judgments we form about them. The event is neutral. Data, the judgment, is the story. And the story determines the emotional outcome. Once you see this distinction, something powerful happens. You gain space. You can change the meaning without denying the reality. Marcus Aurelius practiced this relentlessly, whether facing insult, delay, betrayal, illness, or pain. He would consciously reshape how he saw the moment, not with fake positivity, but with precision. He wasn't saying everything is fine. He was saying, let me see this accurately so I can respond wisely. Because a distorted frame weakens you even when you're capable. A clean frame strengthens you even when you're struggling. Consider failure. The event is simple. Something didn't work, but the frame changes everything. One frame says, this proves I'm not good enough. That leads to shame and withdrawal. Another says, this is feedback. That leads to learning. Another says, this is the price of mastery. That builds persistence. Another says, this is humiliation. It breeds bitterness. Same event, it's different lives. Or take rejection. One frame says, I'm unlovable. Another says, this wasn't aligned. Another says, this is redirection. Another says, I need to improve. Some frames are compassionate, some are harsh. Some are accurate, some are self-deceptive. The goal isn't to choose the most comforting frame. It's to choose the most truthful frame that leads to the best behavior. Stoicism is practical. It cares about action, about character. Seneca warned that much of our suffering is self-created, amplified by exaggeration. It turns small moments into permanent verdicts. Use absolute language. Never, everyone, no one. We treat temporary setbacks as lifelong identities, and then we act as if those stories are destiny. The first step toward clarity is catching that exaggeration. Because exaggeration is emotional, not factual. Clear thinking begins when you speak to yourself in accurate sentences, not cruel ones. Here's a simple practice. When an emotional spike hits, ask yourself, what sentence am I attaching to this moment? That sentence is the frame, and once you hear it, you can challenge it, refine it, replace it. This is ruining my life, is it? Or is it just ruining an hour? They don't respect me. Is that true? Or did they act poorly once? I'm behind. Behind whom? On what timeline? By whose standards? Clarity begins when you stop speaking in absolutes. Marcus Aurelius had a powerful framing technique. He stripped events down to their raw form, removing emotional decoration. An insult became just sound and opinion. Praise became breath and noise. His pain became sensation. He reminded himself that fear often comes from imagination, turning something small into something monstrous. This isn't numbness. It's resistance to mental hypnosis. Because frames hypnotize. If you frame a problem as impossible, you stop trying. If you frame it as difficult but solvable, you stay engaged. If you frame someone as an enemy, you become reactive. If you frame them as human, confused, insecure, you become calmer and more strategic. If you frame your mistakes as proof of weakness, you hide. If you frame them as training, you grow. The most stoic frames are the ones that bring you back to virtue. When you're unsure how to interpret something, ask, which frame helps me practice courage, justice, self-control, and wisdom? Virtue isn't abstract morality. It's practical direction. If a frame makes you petty, reactive, dishonest, or fearful, even if it feels comforting, it's not a good frame. If it steadies you, strengthens you, and sharpens your character, it's likely closer to the truth. There's also a dangerous kind of framing, the kind that excuses. This is just how I am. Can't change. That's how the world works. Those frames feel realistic, but they quietly remove responsibility. They trap you. Stoicism rejects them completely. Epictetus was clear. You are not your impulses, not your past, not your mood. You are your choices. You are what you do with what happens. So here's a tool you can carry with you. When you feel foggy about a decision, create 3 frames for the same situation. 1 negative, 1 neutral, 1 empowering. Then ask, which frame is most accurate and which leads to the best action? You're not lying to yourself. You're expanding perspective so you can move forward with clarity. And this leads into the next serious step. Because clarity isn't only about how you see the present, it's about facing the future honestly. The Stoics had a practice for this. Premeditatio malorum, imagining possible difficulties, not to become anxious, but to become prepared. And one of its most powerful uses is this: recognizing the cost of inaction. Because most people calculate the risk of acting, but never the risk of staying the same. One of the most overlooked dangers in decision-making is not what might happen if you act, but what will happen if you don't. Many people spend hours imagining everything that could go wrong with action, yet almost never sit quietly and picture the future created by inaction. That blind spot is costly. We analyze the risks of movement in obsessive detail, but we treat standing still as neutrals. If doing nothing carries no price, but inaction is never free. It charges you slowly. It takes payment in time, in self-respect, in missed chances, and in the gradual weakening of your courage. The Stoics had a name for confronting this: premeditatio malorum, the thoughtful anticipation of difficulty. But the purpose was never to scare yourself. It was preparation. It was about removing surprise from reality and rehearsing resilience before it was required. By meeting fear in advance, the unknown loses some of its power. Seneca wrote often about this kind of mental preparation. He believed that someone who occasionally reflects on loss becomes less controlled by the fear of losing. Not because they grow indifferent, but because they grow ready. And readiness brings clarity. Most people avoid this practice because it sounds pessimistic. In truth, it's an act of care for your future self. It's saying, I won't let avoidance quietly decide my life for me. There are 2 sides to this exercise. First, you imagine what could go wrong if you act. That part is familiar. But then comes the part most people skip. You imagine what happens if you don't act, if you don't set the boundary. What does the relationship look like 6 months from now? If you don't change your health habits, how does your body feel a year from today? If you don't build the skill, where are your options 2 years from now? If you avoid the hard conversation, what happens to your self-respect? If you keep waiting for certainty, what does your life look like at the end of this year? Inaction has a future. We just avoid looking at it, and the reason it's uncomfortable to look is because it forces a difficult truth into view. Many of our problems aren't only happening to us, we're also sustaining them through avoidance. That realization is painful, but it's also clarity. Marcus Aurelius often pushed himself toward action with a kind of clean urgency, not panic, not pressure, but awareness. He reminded himself, you could leave life at any moment. Let that fact guide what you say, think, and do. That sentence isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to wake you up. When you remember time is finite, you stop treating your future as guaranteed. You stop negotiating endlessly with tomorrow. You stop delaying your own life. Premeditatio malorum wakes you without creating fear. So try a simple version now. Think of the decision you've been avoiding. Imagine two futures. In the first, you act imperfectly, but honestly. You face discomfort. You risk misunderstanding. You tolerate uncertainty. But you gain momentum. You gain information. You gain self-trust. And you gain the quiet pride of being someone who doesn't run from reality. In the second future, you don't act. You keep it open. You delay. You consume more information. Tell yourself soon. At first, it feels safe, but slowly it grows heavy. Your mind gets louder. Your confidence erodes. The problem doesn't stay the same, expands. The fear doesn't fade, it deepens. Eventually, you're no longer avoiding the decision, you're avoiding your own reflection, because you can feel what avoidance is turning you into. That is the real cost of inaction. It doesn't just preserve the problem. It shapes your identity into someone who delays. And once that habit forms, clarity becomes harder, because clarity requires trust. Trust is built through action. Epictetus would say, it's not events that weaken us, it's our judgments and our habits. If avoidance becomes your habit, even small decisions will feel overwhelming. But if facing reality becomes your habit, even difficult choices start to feel cleaner. Your nervous system learns that discomfort is survivable. This is how Stoics use premeditatio malorum in decision-making. You compare the pain of action with the pain of inaction, and you choose the pain that leads somewhere better. Because pain is unavoidable. The question is which pain is meaningful. The pain of action is often sharp and brief. A hard conversation, first step, rejection, effort, learning. The pain of inaction is slow and dull, the ache of regret, the erosion of confidence, the quiet knowledge that you could have been braver. Seneca once wrote that life isn't short, we simply waste much of it. That idea isn't meant to shame you. It's meant to clarify what deserves your attention. If you've been avoiding a decision, you're not broken. You're being called back into your life. But clarity doesn't stop there. Once you see the cost of inaction, a deeper question appears. What beliefs are keeping me stuck? Sometimes fear isn't the only barrier. Sometimes it's a belief you inherited about who you are, what's possible, what you deserve, what failure means, what success means. Beliefs you never consciously chose, but that still steer your decisions. These are inherited beliefs. Have you ever realized, even briefly, that some of your truths are just old sentences repeated so often they started to feel real? That's how inherited beliefs work. They operate quietly, like an internal operating system. You don't make decisions based on facts alone. You make decisions based on beliefs about yourself, about people, about what's allowed, what's safe, what's deserved. And many of those beliefs were installed before you had the ability to question them. The Stoics weren't just teaching emotional regulation, they were teaching freedom from false ideas. Epictetus was relentless about this. He believed most suffering comes from confusion, confusing reputation with worth, comfort with good, fear with wisdom. When he said, some things are up to us and some things are not, he wasn't offering a slogan. He was handing you a blade to cut through inherited illusions. Because inherited beliefs don't just make choices difficult, it makes some choices feel impossible. Not this will be uncomfortable, but I can't do that. Not this might fail, but that's not for someone like me. Not this relationship hurts me, but I should be grateful. Not I need boundaries, but that would be selfish. Not I want more, but who do I think I am? Those aren't facts. They're inherited frames. And once you see that something painful and freeing becomes clear. Some of your indecision isn't caused by lack of clarity. It's caused by a belief system that doesn't allow clarity. It's like trying to see the horizon while standing in a room with no windows. The work, then, is not just to make decisions, but to upgrade the belief system that defines what a good decision even is. Seneca warned repeatedly about the danger of living by the values of the crowd. The crowd rewards things that often have nothing to do with a good life status, pleasure, approval, image. If you absorb those values without examining them, your decisions will always feel conflicted. One part of you wants what is right. Another part is pulled toward what is rewarded. So that inner division is exhausting. Marcus Aurelius returned again and again to the idea of living according to reason and nature. It's not as abstract philosophy, but as a practical rule. Live by what is true, not what is popular. Live by what strengthens your character, not what makes you look impressive. Here's how inherited beliefs usually hide. They don't appear as clear statements like, "I believe this." They appear as emotional reactions. You feel guilt when you set a boundary. That guilt is tied to a belief. Boundaries are selfish. You feel anxious when you rest. That anxiety is tied to a belief. Rest is laziness. You feel shame when you try something new. That shame is tied to a belief. If I'm not immediately good, I'm a fraud. You feel fear when you outgrow someone. That fear is tied to a belief. If I change, I'll be abandoned. The emotion is real, but the belief beneath it may be outdated. So the Stoic move is not self-attack. It's investigation. You become a detective of your own mind. Take one decision you keep avoiding. Now ask yourself, what do I believe would happen if I chose the other path? Not what would actually happen, but what you believe would happen. Often the answers sound like this. People will leave. I'll fail. I'll look stupid. I'll lose respect. I'll be alone. I'll disappoint my family. I'll ruin everything. Those are beliefs, and many of them are inherited. Then ask a question that is brutally Stoic in its honesty. Is this belief true, or is it just familiar? Because familiarity is not truth. Familiarity is repetition. Some beliefs were useful once, or survival strategies. If you grew up where conflict felt dangerous, you may have learned that peace equals safety, so you avoid confrontation even when confrontation is necessary for self-respect. If love was conditional, you may have learned that affection must be earned, so you overperform and overgive. If you were constantly criticized, you may have learned that perfection protects you, so you delay action until you feel ready. Those beliefs may have kept you safe, but they may now be costing you your life. This is where Stoicism becomes sharp. It asks you to live by reason, not by old fear. It asks you to prefer truth over comfort, and you don't do that by arguing with yourself endlessly. You do it by testing beliefs through action, because a belief is only as real as the behavior it produces. Here's a simple method. Pick one inherited belief and run a small experiment against it. If the belief is, if I say no, people will hate me, run the experiment. Say no once calmly without over-explaining, and observe what actually happens. If the belief is, if I slow down, I'll fall behind, run the experiment. Protect 1 hour of deep, undistracted work and see whether your results worsen or improve. If the belief is, if I speak honestly, I'll lose everything, run the experiment. Tell one truth in one relationship, respectfully. Just notice what changes. This is clarity through evidence, not rumination. Epictetus would respect this approach because he cared about practice. He didn't want students who could quote philosophy. He wanted people who could live it. And when you start challenging inherited beliefs, something powerful happens. Decision-making becomes simpler, not because life gets easier, but because fewer invisible rules are controlling you. Once those rules loosen, momentum appears, because clarity is not only something you think, it's something you build through. Movement, action doesn't always follow clarity. Very often action creates clarity. Some problems refuse to be solved in the mind, But the moment you take one honest step, something settles. The fog lifts not because life became simple, but because you've stopped living in theory. This is a hard truth most people learn late. Clarity is not always the prerequisite for action. Often, action is the prerequisite for clarity. The mind loves to negotiate. It loves to simulate progress through planning and imagining. Planning has its place, but there's a moment when planning becomes a drug. It gives the feeling of movement without the risk of movement. Stoicism doesn't fall for it. That, Epictetus, treated philosophy as training, not entertainment. He pushed students toward what they actually did under pressure, because your real beliefs reveal themselves through action, not through what you claim to believe. Marcus Aurelius constantly pulled himself back to the task in front of him, not because he worshipped productivity, but because he understood something essential. When you're trapped in your head, you're trapped in a story. When you act, you meet reality, and reality, even when it's difficult, is often cleaner than the story. Think about how people stay confused. I don't know if I should leave. I don't know if I should start. I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know what I want. Sometimes that uncertainty is real, but often it's fear hiding behind fog. And fear loves fog because fog delays responsibility. Action burns fog. Not reckless action, not impulsive action, deliberate action. It's the smallest honest step that forces contact with reality, because clarity is not a feeling. It's a relationship with truth. And truth is not found in the mind alone. Found where your assumptions are tested against the world. Action is the way out of imagination. It's the moment you step out of the mental movie and into the real scene. The mental movie is always exaggerated worse outcomes, harsher judgments, more humiliation, more catastrophe. Reality is usually simpler, sometimes painful, yes, but simpler. And simplicity brings clarity. So here's a powerful shift. Instead of asking, what is the perfect decision? Ask, what is the next honest action? The next honest action is rarely impressive. It's a phone call, a message, a walk, boundary, a schedule change, a page written, a meeting booked, skill practiced, a difficult conversation started, a small commitment kept. It's an action that costs you a little discomfort today so you don't pay with regret tomorrow. This is where Stoic wisdom becomes practical. You may not control outcomes, but you do control effort. You control integrity, control whether you step forward. Epictetus made this clear. Your responsibility is not to guarantee success. Your responsibility is to act according to reason. That is clarity. And reason does not mean emotional coldness. It means acting from principles instead of impulses. It means saying, even though I'm afraid, I will do what is mine to do. Now, let's make this extremely practical, because this is where people either change or stay the same. If you're facing a decision, don't ask your mind for certainty. Ask it for an experiment. One week, one step. If you're unsure about a career direction, don't wait for confidence to appear. Test your interest with a small project, a conversation with someone in the field, a short course, or a portfolio piece. If you're unsure about a relationship, don't wait for the perfect emotional state. Test clarity through one honest conversation about needs and boundaries. If you're unsure about your discipline, don't wait for motivation to return. Test yourself with a small daily practice you can maintain even when you don't feel inspired. Action gives you data. Data gives you clarity. But there's something even more important. Action rebuilds self-trust. Many people struggle to think clearly because they don't trust themselves. Their doubt comes from a history of broken promises, small ones, but promises nonetheless. They said they would change, and they didn't. They said they would start, and they delayed. They said they would stop, and they repeated the same behavior. Over time, the mind learns to treat its own intentions as unreliable. That creates fog, because when you don't believe your decisions will be honored, you can't decide cleanly. So the fastest way to restore clarity is to keep a small promise, not a heroic promise, a small one. When you keep even a small promise, the mind quiets. It stops arguing. It stops negotiating. It begins to trust you again. And when the mind trusts you, decisions become simpler. Marcus Aurelius spoke often about doing what is right, even when it's difficult. Not to be admired, but to be consistent. And consistency is clarity in motion. It's a mind that knows what it stands for. Now here's something that may sting, but it's meant to free you. Sometimes you're not confused about what to do. You're unsure whether you can handle what happens after you do it. Asterisk, so you keep thinking, you keep analyzing. You keep waiting for a sense of safety that never arrives. Action is how you prove to yourself that you can handle it. You take the step. You survive the discomfort. And confidence grows not as motivation or hype, but as evidence. This is why clarity through action isn't just a technique. It's a way of becoming stronger. A way of becoming someone who doesn't need perfect conditions. Someone who can act with incomplete information, adjust, learn, and continue. And this leads us forward because once you start acting, pain and failure are no longer possibilities. They become realities. Most people either collapse under them or learn to integrate them in a way that makes them calmer, sharper, and wiser. So let's talk about integrating pain and failure. Have you ever failed at something and felt, even briefly, that it wasn't just the plan that failed but you? That distortion is one of the most dangerous habits of the mind. It turns an event into an identity. A single outcome becomes a verdict. And once pain becomes a verdict, clarity disappears, because decisions are no longer made from truth, but from shame. The Stoics approached pain and failure with courage. They didn't glorify them. They didn't avoid them. They treated them as part of life's curriculum. Not because suffering is good, but because suffering is inevitable. Anything inevitable must be trained for. Marcus Aurelius lived this. He faced war, political pressure, illness, betrayal, the death of children, and responsibility for millions. What stands out is not that he remained calm at all times, but that he kept returning to the same inner question. This is here. Now, what is the correct response? He refused to let pain become a story about his worth. He treated it as material. In Stoic language, pain is not an exception, it is raw material for virtue. That's a hard truth, but it's also liberating. It means your worst days don't have to be wasted. Even failure can be turned into wisdom. But first comes honesty. Pain will try to hijack your framing. It will speak in absolutes. This will never improve. I always fail. I'm behind. I'm not built for this. When pain speaks this way, it isn't speaking truth. It's speaking survival. The nervous system is making protective predictions, but protection is not accuracy. Seneca warned that we often suffer twice. Once from the event, and again from the interpretation. That second suffering is optional, but only if you notice it happening. Pain is real. But the story you attach to pain is where your future is decided. So the first step in integrating pain and failure is separating sensation from meaning. The sensation may be grief, disappointment, exhaustion, embarrassment, loneliness. Real meaning is the sentence you attach. If the sentence is this proves I'm weak, you shrink. If the sentence is this is part of growth, you learn. If the sentence is this means I should stop, you quit. If the sentence is this means I need to adjust, you evolve. The event doesn't assign meaning. You do? Epictetus said it clearly. What harms you is not what happens, but what you tell yourself about what happens and what you believe it says about you. He wasn't denying pain, but was defending your inner dignity, because there is a difference. Between being hurt and being broken, pain often destroys clarity because it narrows time. When you're hurting, the present feels permanent, but you can't imagine a different emotional state, so you make decisions as if this moment will last forever. You cut people off in humiliation. You abandon goals in exhaustion. You sabotage relationships in fear. You lower standards just to feel relief. The Stoic response is to remember the wave. Emotion is a wave. Pain is a wave. It rises, peaks and falls. The mistake is not feeling it. The mistake is making lifelong decisions at the peak. So here is a practical rule for clarity during pain. Do not decide your future while you are emotionally bleeding. That's not weakness. It's strategy. Marcus Aurelius often delayed judgment. He waited before assigning meaning. He stripped events of drama and saw them as they were. This is how pain is integrated, not by suppression, but by presence without surrender. And integration is more than endurance, is learning. Failure becomes feedback only if you stay honest without becoming cruel. People usually fall into two traps after failure. One is denial. It wasn't my fault, so nothing changes. The other is self-destruction. It was all my fault, so I collapse. Both avoid growth. Clarity lives in the middle ground. What part of this was mine? What part was not? What will I adjust next time? That middle space is where growth actually happens. Seneca emphasized self-examination not as self-punishment, but as disciplined reflection. At the end of each day, he would review himself. What he did well, where he fell short, and what he intended to correct. That habit is a factory for clarity because when you can look at failure without shame, failure loses its power, stops being a threat, and becomes information. And once failure becomes information, something changes inside you. You grow bolder. You take smarter risks. You stop needing certainty. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You stop protecting an image. You start living. There's a deeper, layer to pain that most people miss. Pain often reveals what truly mattered to you. If something hurts, it's usually because you cared, invested, hoped. That is not weakness. That is the cost of being alive. The danger appears when pain convinces you that caring itself was the mistake. That's when people shut down. They harden. They call emotional withdrawal wisdom. But the Stoics were never teaching numbness. They were teaching courage with feeling present. So here is how pain is integrated without turning into bitterness. You let pain refine your values, not poison them. If failure revealed a weakness, you train it. If loss revealed attachment, you loosen it. If rejection revealed dependence on approval, you reclaim your standards. If embarrassment revealed pride, you practice humility. Pain becomes a teacher, but only if you listen without letting it intimidate you. There is one final mistake that destroys clarity more than almost anything else. Using past pain as a prediction engine. Many people don't decide based on reality. They decide based on old wounds. Last time I tried, I failed. Last time I trusted, I got hurt. Last time I spoke up, I was punished. So they avoid. They stay small. They choose. Availability over alignment. Comfort over growth. Integration means learning the lesson then releasing the fear. The lesson is meant to make you wiser, not smaller. And once pain and failure are integrated, something shifts. You begin to see more clearly, not just within yourself, but in the world. You develop what we can call layered vision. Layered vision. Seeing beyond the surface. Have you ever looked back at a moment that once felt confusing, and months later it seemed obvious? The situation didn't change, you did. That shift is layered vision, the ability to see multiple levels of a situation at once. The visible facts, the emotional reaction, the hidden incentives, the long-term consequences, the character signals, the repeating patterns beneath the words. This isn't cynicism, it's precision. Most poor decisions happen because we operate on a single layer. We react only to what's loudest, most emotional, or most urgent and treat that as the whole truth. But life is rarely single. People aren't, and neither is your own mind. The Stoics trained themselves to see what others missed, not by distrusting everything, but by seeing accurately. Marcus Aurelius practiced stripping appearances down to essence. He reminded himself that fame is vapor, praise is noise, insults are opinions, luxury is matter shaped into symbols. That's layered vision, seeing the shine and the substance at the same time. Epictetus did the same with social pressure. He could hear the crowd and still ask, Is this in my control? Is this aligned with virtue? Should this move me? It isn't ignoring people. It's refusing to let the shallow layer run your life. Let's break these layers down in a way you can. Actually use layer 1, the event. What happened? Plainly, without interpretation. A message arrived. A job offer was made. Someone criticized you. A plan failed. Keep this layer clean. Clarity starts with reality. Layer 2, reaction. What are you feeling? Anger, fear, excitement, shame, relief, jealousy, desire. These signals matter, but they are not commanders. Layer 3. Meaning, what story are you attaching? They don't respect me. This is my only chance. I'm falling behind. This is where distortion sneaks in and where discipline is required. Layer 4. Incentives. What does each person want here? What are they protecting? Incentives explain behavior more reliably than words. Layer 5. Pattern. Has this happened before? Do you react this way often? Is this a repeating loop? Patterns are truth with a memory? Layer 6. Consequence. Not just immediate outcomes, but long-term ones. If you act from anger, what does it build over time? If you avoid, what grows? If you choose comfort, what does it quietly cost? Layer 7. Character. Who are you becoming through this choice? Because every decision trains you into someone. You're always practicing either strength or weakness. Now notice what happens when you see all the layers. You stop being easily manipulated by others and by yourself. Seneca described wisdom as a form of seeing what lasts, seeing what fades, seeing what is under your control. Wisdom isn't just knowledge, it's perception, and once perception sharpens, you begin to notice small details that reveal large truths. Warm words with cold actions. Attraction to chaos because it feels familiar. Opportunities that are actually traps dressed as praise. Urgency driven by the desire for relief, not truth. Moments when you're choosing availability over alignment. Moments when you're asking for certainty because you're avoiding responsibility. This is what clarity looks like when it becomes a skill. So here's a practical exercise. Ask yourself, which layer am I stuck in? Most people get trapped in reaction or story. Layered vision invites you to move. Stuck in reaction, shift to consequence. Stuck in story, return to the event. Stuck in facts, move to values. Stuck in incentives, look for patterns. Change the layer and the decision clears. Asterisk, and here is a deeply Stoic guiding question.
Ow.
What is the larger view? Marcus Aurelius constantly zoomed out time, mortality, scale, the smallness of ego. That zoom out wasn't escapism, it was perspective. And perspective dissolves emotional distortion. Zooming out helps prevent small things from feeling like the end of the world. But layered vision also includes the opposite skill, zooming in. Sometimes clarity comes from distance. It comes from seeing the small, practical truth directly in front of you. The wider view may tell you to release something. The closer view may tell you to take action. Wisdom is learning how to move between these scales without losing yourself. And this brings us to the final theme, because all of these practices lead toward a single Stoic aim. Mental sovereignty. Mental sovereignty. Owning your mind. Have you ever noticed quietly, almost uncomfortably, that the hardest part of life isn't the world outside you, but how easily your mind can be taken? A comment can steal it. A memory can hijack it. A craving can pull it away. Fear can shrink it. Someone else's opinion can control it. Even a poor night's sleep can knock it off balance. And suddenly, you're no longer choosing, you're reacting. Acting from habit, from impulse, from old conditioning. That is the loss of sovereignty. You may be physically free, but mentally governed. Stoicism is a rebellion against that. Not loud, not aggressive, but quiet and disciplined. It's the decision to become someone whose mind is not owned by the crowd, the algorithm, mood swings, ego, or fear. Epictetus built his philosophy on this idea. It wasn't trying to make people impressive, it was trying to make them unshakable. He returned again and again to the same distinction. What is up to you? and what is not. Because sovereignty begins the moment you stop fighting what you can't control and stop neglecting what you can. Your attention, your judgments, your choices, your standards, your effort, your character. The inner domain. Most people give up sovereignty accidentally. Not by choice, but by repetition. They scroll to escape discomfort. They argue to defend ego. They seek approval to soothe insecurity. They avoid what scares them. Over time, the mind learns a dangerous lesson. I don't have to endure reality, I can escape it. That escape becomes a lifestyle. And clarity fades because clarity requires endurance. The endurance to stay with what is true. Marcus Aurelius understood how fragile the mind is. That's why his meditations read like someone constantly bringing himself back to center. Wasn't writing for history, he was writing to govern himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. That isn't motivation, it's a law of freedom. Sovereignty isn't positive thinking, it's governance. And governance requires principles filters that decide what gets access to you. So what does mental sovereignty look like in real life? You're tired, busy, tempted, triggered. It looks like the pause, that brief gap before reacting. Passivity control, reclaiming the steering wheel. One breath is enough to remember, I choose. It looks like framing using accurate language instead of emotional exaggeration. No catastrophes, no absolute thinking. Destiny. You tell yourself the truth without cruelty. It looks like protecting your attention, reducing noise, diffusing inputs that don't help you act wisely. Because attention is the currency of sovereignty. If you can't hold it, you can't hold your life. It looks like choosing alignment over availability, saying no to what's merely present so you can say yes to what's right, refusing to live as a responder to everyone else's agenda. It looks like acting without certainty, using action to create clarity. Sovereign people don't wait to feel ready. They move, adjust, and learn. They build trust with themselves through follow-through. And it looks like integrating pain and failure, letting pain teach without letting. It defines. You don't turn a bad moment into a verdict on your worth. There's a deeper layer most people miss. Sovereignty isn't only control over reactions, it's control over aims. What are you optimizing for? If you don't choose your aim, default aims take over. Comfort, approval, status, distraction. Sovereign mind chooses deliberately. The Stoics chose virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, self-control. You don't need the same words, but you do need a compass. Without one, what feels like freedom becomes drift. And if you want this to last not as a temporary insight, but a way of life, you need one thing: daily return. Marcus Aurelius didn't become steady by reading once. He became steady by returning. Daily, recentering, renewing. Practicing sovereignty isn't built in breakthroughs. It's built in repetition. A simple daily return could look like this. In the morning, decide what kind of mind you'll have, not what kind of day. The day isn't fully yours. Your mind is. Will you be reactive or deliberate? Scattered or focused? Approval hungry or grounded in standards? Avoidant or willing to train through discomfort? At night review? Seneca recommended this. Where did I lose myself today? Where did I reclaim myself? What did I do that I respect? What do I want to correct? Not with shame, with clarity. Because reflection is how sovereignty becomes real. And here's the final quiet truth that holds everything together. Clear thinking isn't a talent. It's self-respect in motion. When you respect yourself, you don't let your mind be dragged. By every impulse, you don't trade your future for relief. You choose hard truth over comforting stories. You become someone others can trust, but more importantly, someone you can trust. So as you sit with all of this, here's a simple invitation. No dramatic life change required. The next time you feel the urge to react, the next time you want to escape discomfort, the next time your mind fills with noise, pause and ask one question. Who is holding my mind right now? If the answer is anything other than you, you already know what to do. You can take it back with one breath, one choice. And maybe that's what freedom has always been.